At my grandson's wedding, my daughter-in-law refused to let me join the family photo. The photographer had just raised his camera when my daughter-in-law lifted one hand, smiled politely, and said, "Not this one, Lorraine. This picture is for immediate family only." For a heartbeat, the entire garden fell silent. I looked around, expecting someone, my son, my grandson, anyone, to tell her she had made a mistake. No one did. I simply smiled, stepped back, and folded my hands in front of me. Before that wedding day was over, everyone would learn the truth about who truly belonged in this family. I'm glad you're here. Stay with me until the very end, and let me know in the comments which city you're watching from. I'd love to see how far this story has traveled. I've always believed that weddings weren't just celebrations. They were living photographs of a family's history. Years later, people rarely remembered what flowers decorated the tables or what flavor the cake had been, but they remembered who stood beside them when a new chapter began. That was why I'd spent nearly 3 months looking forward to my grandson Keaton's wedding. Not because I loved fancy receptions, not because I cared about expensive dresses, but because I'd waited 29 years to watch the little boy I helped raise become a husband. The ceremony was held at a beautiful vineyard just outside Charlottesville, Virginia. Rows of white wooden chairs overlooked rolling hills covered with late summer vines. Crystal chandeliers hung beneath a clear reception tent, catching the afternoon sunlight like tiny stars. Everything looked elegant. Everything looked perfect. Exactly the kind of wedding Sabrina had always dreamed about. She had planned every detail herself. Every flower, every napkin, every ribbon tied around the chairs. People kept complimenting her throughout the afternoon. "You've done an incredible job. It looks like something from a magazine." She accepted every compliment with the same practiced smile. I smiled too, because despite everything, I wanted this day to be beautiful for Keaton. I arrived nearly an hour early. Old habits. When you've spent decades making sure birthdays started on time, and Thanksgiving dinner never got cold, arriving early becomes part of who you are. I'd chosen a soft lavender dress after trying on nearly a dozen others. Nothing flashy, nothing that might draw attention. Just something elegant enough for my grandson's wedding. As I looked into my bedroom mirror that morning, I touched the small silver locket resting against my collarbone. Inside was a picture of my late husband, Everett. "I wish you were here," I whispered. "He'd look so handsome today." Everett had adored Keaton. When Keaton was 5, he'd insisted on wearing his grandfather's oversized work boots around the backyard because he wanted to walk like Grandpa. When he was 10, they spent every Saturday morning building birdhouses together in our garage. When he graduated high school, Everett cried harder than anyone else. He never lived long enough to see this wedding. I carried both our love with me that afternoon. As I entered the venue, guests greeted me warmly. "Lorraine, you look wonderful. So good to see you." Several of Keaton's college friends came over to hug me. One even laughed. "Mrs. Avery, Keaton still talks about your blueberry pancakes." I laughed with them. I hope he's exaggerating. He isn't. For a while, everything felt exactly as it should. The ceremony itself was beautiful. Keaton stood beneath a flower-covered arbor, trying, and failing, to hide how nervous he was. Across the aisle, Tessa appeared on her father's arm. The moment Keaton saw her, his eyes filled with tears. Mine did too. Love still had the power to make the whole world disappear for a few precious minutes. When they exchanged vows, I silently squeezed Everett's locket inside my hand. You'd be proud of him, I thought. After the ceremony, everyone moved toward the gardens for cocktail hour, while the photographer organized family portraits before sunset. Groups were called one after another: the bride's college friends, the groom's cousins, the grandparents. Each group laughed, smiled, shifted slightly closer together. The photographer, her name tag read Marlo Quinn Photography, worked with calm professionalism. She joked with children, straightened crooked ties, adjusted bouquets. Then someone announced, "Immediate family of the groom, please." My heart lifted. I had imagined this photograph for years, not because I cared about appearing in pictures, but because one day, when I was gone, I hoped my great-grandchildren might look at that photograph and know their grandmother had been there on one of the happiest days of her grandson's life. I walked toward the group. Keaton was helping Tessa with her train. Garrett stood beside them. Sabrina was arranging everyone exactly where she wanted them. As I stepped onto the stone pathway leading toward the family, Sabrina turned. She smiled. Not warmly, politely. The kind of smile people wear when telling someone they're in the wrong place. "Oh, Lorraine," she said softly enough that only those nearest could hear. "Not this one." I paused. "I'm sorry. This photo is for immediate family only." For a second, I honestly thought she'd misspoken. Then she looked toward Marlo. "We'll do another picture later." The photographer hesitated. Garrett lowered his eyes. Keaton was speaking with one of his groomsmen and hadn't heard a word. Around us, conversations slowed. People pretended not to stare. No one moved. No one objected. No one said, "She is immediate family." I felt every eye on me. My cheeks grew warm. The easiest thing would have been to argue. To remind everyone that I wasn't some distant relative. I was the woman who had held Keaton on the day he was born. The woman who had rocked him to sleep through fevers. The woman who had attended every birthday, every recital, every graduation. Instead, I smiled. "I understand," I said quietly. Then I stepped backward. One step, then another. As the photographer lifted her camera, I stood beneath an old oak tree alone, watching my family smile without me. At that moment, I believed the photograph would become the most painful memory of that day. I had no idea. It was only the beginning. I stood beneath that old oak tree until the photographer finished taking every version of the family portrait. Parents, siblings, bride and groom, grandchildren, even extended relatives. Each time the camera clicked, another piece of me seemed to disappear from the celebration. I kept smiling whenever someone happened to glance my way. At 69, I'd learned something about public humiliation. The louder you defend yourself, the more people remember the scene. The quieter you remain, the more they begin asking questions on their own. So I chose silence, not because I was weak, because I refused to let my grandson's wedding become a spectacle. After a few more photographs, cocktail hour officially began. Music drifted across the vineyard as servers carried silver trays filled with sparkling cider, champagne, and tiny hors d'oeuvres that looked almost too beautiful to eat. Guests laughed beneath strings of white lights that had already begun glowing against the late afternoon sky. Everywhere I looked, people were celebrating love. I wanted to celebrate too. I really did. Instead, I found an empty chair near the edge of the garden where I could watch everyone without being noticed. The breeze carried the scent of lavender and fresh-cut grass. It reminded me of the summers Everett and I spent planting flowers behind our first little house. He always believed every celebration should leave people feeling more connected than before. "If people leave feeling lonely," he used to say, "then somebody forgot what the day was really about." I closed my eyes for a moment. "I miss you today," I whispered inside my heart. More than ever. A shadow fell across my table. "Mrs. Avery?" I looked up. It was Marlo Quinn, the photographer. She still held one of her cameras around her neck. "I just wanted to make sure you're doing okay." I smiled politely. "I'm perfectly fine." She hesitated. People who work around families develop a special instinct. They notice things other people ignore. I hope I didn't make you uncomfortable back there." "Oh, sweetheart," I said gently. "You were simply doing your job." She looked relieved, but only for a second. "I've photographed more than 200 weddings," she said quietly. "I can usually tell when something isn't right." Before I could answer, someone called her name from across the lawn. She apologized and hurried away. I watched her disappear into the crowd. Something about the expression on her face stayed with me. It wasn't pity. It looked more like guilt. I tried not to think about it. Instead, I focused on Keaton. He looked happier than I'd ever seen him. He and Tessa moved from table to table thanking their guests, laughing with friends from college, hugging relatives they hadn't seen in years. Every time he looked in my direction, he smiled and waved. That smile told me something important. He had no idea what had happened. If he had known, he would have come to me immediately. Of that, I was certain. Keaton had never been cruel. Not as a little boy. Not as a young man. When he was 8 years old, he once spent his entire allowance buying birdseed because he didn't want the robins in my backyard to go hungry during winter. When he was 15, he insisted on mowing my lawn every Saturday after Everett's arthritis became too painful. Even after college, he called every Sunday evening just to ask how I was doing. People don't lose that kind of heart overnight. Which meant someone else had made the decision for him. My eyes drifted toward Sabrina. She stood near the reception tent, greeting guests with effortless grace. She laughed at exactly the right moments. touched people's arms while speaking, remembered everyone's names. From a distance, she looked like the perfect hostess. She always had. The first time Keaton introduced her to me nearly 6 years earlier, she'd brought homemade lemon bars and a bouquet of white lilies. She called me Mom before dinner was over. I remember thinking how lucky our family was. For a long time, I believed every thoughtful gesture was genuine. Looking back now, I wondered if she had simply learned exactly what people wanted to see. The reception doors opened. Guests slowly found their assigned tables. I unfolded the small place card waiting beside my dinner plate. Lorraine Avery, table 21. I looked around. The head table stood at the center of the room. Parents sat nearby. Close relatives filled the surrounding tables. Mine sat near the back corner beside coworkers from the catering company, a retired neighbor of the bride's family, and 2 guests I had never met before. For a moment, I wondered if it had been another mistake. Then I noticed Garrett walking past. He glanced toward my table. Our eyes met. Almost immediately, he looked away. He didn't stop. He didn't say anything. He simply kept walking toward the front of the ballroom. That hurt far more than Sabrina's words. A stranger can embarrass you. Only your own child can make you feel invisible. As everyone settled into their seats, I carefully folded my napkin onto my lap and reminded myself why I had come. Not for recognition, not for photographs, not even for family. I had come to witness the happiest day of my grandson's life. Nothing, not even this, would take that away from him. At least, that was what I kept telling myself. Because somewhere deep inside, a quiet voice had already begun asking a question I wasn't ready to answer. If Sabrina had gone this far to keep me out of one photograph, what else had she been quietly removing me from all these years? The ballroom grew louder as dinner was served. Crystal glasses clinked together. Soft jazz floated through the speakers. Waiters moved gracefully between tables, filling water glasses and placing warm bread baskets in front of each guest. Around me, conversations flowed naturally. People talked about the ceremony, the flowers, the honeymoon. How beautiful Tessa looked walking down the aisle. I smiled whenever someone spoke to me. No one at my table seemed to realize I was the groom's grandmother. To them, I was simply another pleasant older guest. In a strange way, that almost made the evening easier. No awkward questions, no sympathetic looks. Just polite conversation with complete strangers. One gentleman across from me introduced himself as Richard. He had worked with Tessa's father for nearly 20 years. So, he asked with a friendly smile, "How do you know the bride?" I hesitated for the briefest moment. "I'm actually Keaton's grandmother." His eyebrows lifted. "The groom's grandmother?" "Yes." He looked genuinely surprised. I thought the groom's family was seated near the front. I laughed softly. So did I. He immediately realized he'd touched a sensitive subject. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean. You have nothing to apologize for." He nodded politely, but I noticed him glance toward the front of the ballroom. Even a stranger could see something didn't make sense. Dinner continued. The speeches began shortly afterward. Keaton's best man told stories about college adventures. Everyone laughed. Tessa's maid of honor spoke about friendship and finding true love. There wasn't a dry eye in the room. Then Garrett stood. As father of the groom, everyone expected him to give the final family toast. He cleared his throat, smiled proudly at Keaton, spoke about watching his son grow into a remarkable man. He thanked Tessa's parents. He thanked the wedding planner. He thanked Sabrina for creating the perfect day. The ballroom applauded. I applauded too. Garrett never once mentioned his father. He never mentioned Everett, the man who had taught Keaton to ride a bicycle, the man who built the treehouse still standing behind our old family home, the man whose pocket watch Keaton carried in his tuxedo that very evening. My husband had shaped so much of Keaton's childhood, yet somehow his name had disappeared from the speech. I lowered my eyes. Perhaps Garrett had simply been nervous. People forget things when emotions take over. At least, that's what I wanted to believe. When the applause ended, the lights dimmed for a short video presentation. A large screen descended beside the dance floor. Childhood photographs appeared one after another. Baby pictures, birthday parties, Christmas mornings, Little League games, family vacations. Guests laughed every few seconds. There he is with missing front teeth. Look how tiny he was. What a cute kid. I watched every image carefully. Everett appeared in several photographs, holding Keaton on his shoulders, teaching him to fish, helping him carve a pumpkin. Seeing my husband again made my heart ache in the sweetest way. Then something slowly began to bother me. I wasn't in any of them. Not one. At first, I assumed I simply hadn't noticed. So I watched more closely. Picture after picture filled the screen. I saw Garrett. I saw Sabrina. I saw cousins, neighbors, friends. Even Keaton's elementary school teacher appeared in one photograph. But not me. 20 years of birthdays, school plays, graduations, camping trips, Sunday dinners, thousands of family memories. And somehow, I had vanished from every single one. The lights came back on. Everyone applauded the beautiful slideshow. I clapped with them. Inside, however, a question settled quietly into my mind. Photographs don't erase themselves. Someone had chosen every picture shown that evening. Someone had looked through decades of family albums. Someone had decided which memories belonged and which ones didn't. As coffee and dessert were served, I excused myself and stepped outside for a little fresh air. The evening had cooled. Small lights wrapped around the vineyard trees glowed softly against the darkening sky. The laughter from inside sounded distant now, peaceful. I stood alone for a minute, breathing in the cool Virginia air. "Mrs. Avery?" I turned. Marlo stood a few feet away, still carrying one camera over her shoulder. "I've been looking for you." Her voice sounded hesitant, as though she'd been debating whether to speak to me at all. "Is everything all right?" I asked. She looked back toward the ballroom before answering. There's something I think you deserve to know." She swallowed. This afternoon, before the ceremony, Sabrina handed me a printed family photo list. I listened without interrupting. "That happens at almost every wedding," she continued. "Families usually organize group pictures in advance." I nodded. She had every combination written down. She paused again. Parents, siblings, grandparents, cousins, the whole family. Another pause. Then she crossed out one name. I felt my heartbeat slow. Not faster, slower. My name. Marlo lowered her eyes. She drew a line through Lorraine Avery herself. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. The sounds of music drifted through the open ballroom doors. Someone inside laughed loudly. The wedding continued as though nothing had happened. "So," I finally asked, "it wasn't spontaneous?" She slowly shook her head. "No. It was planned before your grandson ever walked down the aisle." I thanked her for telling me. She looked almost relieved. "I've photographed hundreds of weddings," she said quietly. "I've seen divorced parents refuse to stand together. I've seen siblings arguing over inheritance. But I've never seen anyone intentionally remove a grandmother from every family portrait." She hesitated one last time. "And, Mrs. Avery, yes? I don't think the photographs were the only thing she changed." I looked at Marlo for a long moment. There was no reason for her to invent a story like that. She had nothing to gain, nothing to prove. She was simply a professional photographer who had found herself caught in the middle of someone else's family. "What do you mean?" I asked quietly. "You don't think the photographs were the only thing she changed?" Marlo shifted the camera strap on her shoulder. "I probably shouldn't say too much." I smiled gently. "You've already said enough." She looked relieved that I wasn't asking her to betray anyone further. She began carefully. "I've worked with a lot of wedding planners and families over the years. Most people make small changes during the day. But your daughter-in-law kept asking for revisions." "Revisions?" "The seating chart, the family photo schedule, the introductions, even some of the names on the reception program." I felt a strange calm settle over me. When you're expecting one betrayal and discover several more, your heart eventually stops reacting. It simply starts paying attention. "Did she explain why?" Marlo shook her head. "She only said she wanted everything to look perfect." Perfect. That word echoed in my mind. Sabrina had always loved that word. The perfect neighborhood, the perfect Christmas card, the perfect dinner party, the perfect social media pictures. Everything carefully arranged, everything carefully controlled. Perhaps I should have recognized that years ago. Instead, I'd mistaken perfection for kindness. "I appreciate your honesty," I said. "You've shown me more respect today than some members of my own family." Her eyes softened. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Avery. I truly am." She walked back toward the ballroom, leaving me alone beneath the evening sky. I stayed outside another minute before returning inside. The reception was moving into its next chapter. Guests had finished dessert. The band was preparing for dancing. Laughter filled every corner of the room. Nothing on the surface had changed. Only I had. As I entered the ballroom, I noticed Callum Pierce, the wedding coordinator, speaking with two servers near the entrance. He looked exhausted. His headset was hanging loosely around his neck, and he was checking something on a clipboard. When he saw me, he offered a polite smile. "Mrs. Avery, everything going all right?" "It seems to be," I answered. "You've organized a beautiful wedding." He laughed quietly. "Beautiful weddings usually look much calmer than they actually are." "I imagine they do." He started to excuse himself, then hesitated. "Actually," he lowered his voice, "I've been meaning to apologize." I looked at him with surprise. "For what?" "This afternoon, when your table assignment changed." My heart skipped a beat. My table assignment changed? His expression immediately told me he had said more than he intended. I assumed you knew." "Knew what?" He glanced around to make sure no one was listening. "The original seating chart placed you at table 3. Table 3. That was directly beside Garrett, Sabrina, Keaton, and Tessa. Family. The final version listed you at table 21. He looked genuinely uncomfortable. "I thought the family had requested it together." "They didn't?" "I honestly don't know. I only received updated instructions." "When?" "This morning." The ballroom suddenly felt much louder. Not because people were speaking any differently, because every cheerful voice now sounded strangely distant. The family photograph. The seating chart. What else? I thanked Callum and walked slowly toward my table. For the first time all evening, I wasn't trying to convince myself these were isolated incidents. Patterns were beginning to emerge. And patterns don't happen by accident. As I sat down, I unfolded the reception program that had been resting beside my dessert plate since dinner. Earlier, I hadn't paid much attention to it. Now I read every line. Welcome message, wedding party, order of events, family acknowledgements. I stopped. There it was, a short paragraph thanking the people who had supported Keaton throughout his life. His parents, his teachers, Tessa's family, close friends, even the neighbor who had introduced Keaton to fishing as a teenager. I read the paragraph again, slowly. My name wasn't there. Neither was Everett's. I closed the booklet. Years ago, Everett and I had helped Keaton with everything we could. When Garrett worked long hours, Keaton often stayed at our house after school. I taught him multiplication at our kitchen table. Everett taught him how to change a tire. We attended every school concert, every baseball game, every birthday. Not because anyone asked us to, because that's what grandparents do. They quietly fill the spaces where love is needed. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger burns hot. What I felt now was colder than that. It was clarity. One missing photograph could have been an oversight. A distant table might have been an honest mistake. One forgotten name in a printed program could have slipped past an editor. But all three? No. Someone had been removing me from this wedding piece by piece. Not loudly, not dramatically, carefully, almost professionally. The music changed. The band invited everyone onto the dance floor. Guests stood, laughing as couples reached for one another's hands. I watched Keaton take Tessa into his arms. They looked genuinely happy. That was the only thing keeping me in my seat. He still didn't know. I was certain of it. Then, as I reached for my glass of water, I noticed Sabrina standing across the room. She wasn't looking at the dance floor. She wasn't watching the bride and groom. She was watching me. When our eyes met, she smiled. It wasn't the warm smile she'd shown the guests all evening. It was small, satisfied, as if she believed everything had gone exactly according to plan. She looked away before I could react, and in that quiet moment, I made a promise to myself. I would not confront her tonight. Not at Keaton's wedding. Not without knowing the whole truth. Because if Sabrina had spent this much effort erasing me from one single day, I needed to find out how long she had been rewriting the story of our family. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. People laughed. Glasses were raised. The band played one song after another, filling the ballroom with music that should have made everyone feel closer together. I smiled whenever someone looked my way. I congratulated the newlyweds. I accepted compliments about my dress. I even danced once with an elderly gentleman who introduced himself as Tessa's great-uncle. If anyone had been watching me closely, they would have thought I was enjoying every moment. Inside, however, my thoughts refused to settle. Marlowe's words replayed over and over. She crossed out your name herself. Then Callum's quiet confession. Your table was originally near the family. Neither of them had known each other. Neither had any reason to lie. Two different people had unknowingly handed me two pieces of the same puzzle. I simply didn't know what the finished picture looked like yet. Around 10 o'clock, the reception began winding down. Guests lined up to hug Keaton and Tessa goodbye before they left for their honeymoon. I waited until the line had almost disappeared. I didn't want to keep them from enjoying the happiest night of their lives. When it was finally my turn, Keaton wrapped both arms around me. His tuxedo still smelled faintly of cedar and aftershave. "Grandma," he said, smiling, "thank you for coming. I wouldn't have missed this for the world." He pulled back and studied my face. "Are you okay?" For just a second, I wondered if he had noticed something. Then Tessa slipped her arm through his. "We're so glad you could celebrate with us." She kissed my cheek. There was such genuine warmth in her voice that my heart softened immediately. Neither of them knew. I was more certain of that than ever. I reached into my handbag and handed Keaton a small velvet box. It wasn't expensive. Inside was Everett's gold tie clip. Keaton had admired it ever since he was a teenager. "I wanted you to have this," I said. "It belonged to your grandfather." His smile disappeared. He opened the box carefully, almost reverently. For a long moment he couldn't speak. I thought you were keeping this." "I was, but I think he'd want you to wear it now." His eyes filled with tears. "I'll treasure it forever." "I know you will." He hugged me again. That embrace reminded me of the little boy who used to fall asleep on my shoulder after long summer barbecues. Whatever had happened that day, that boy was still somewhere inside the man standing before me. As I walked toward the parking lot, I passed Sabrina. She was thanking guests as they left. When she saw me, she smiled with the same polished expression she had worn all day. "I'm so glad you could make it, Lorraine." The words sounded pleasant, almost affectionate. If someone had overheard us, they would have thought she was the perfect daughter-in-law. "It was a beautiful wedding," I answered. "I'm happy for Keaton." "So are we." There was a brief silence. "I hope you enjoyed yourself." I looked directly into her eyes. I enjoyed seeing my grandson marry the woman he loves. Nothing more, nothing less. For the first time all evening, something flickered across her face. Not guilt, not embarrassment, surprise. Perhaps she had expected me to confront her. Perhaps she had rehearsed excuses during the reception. Instead, I simply wished her good night and walked away. Sometimes, silence unsettles people far more than anger. The drive home took a little over an hour. Virginia's country roads were almost empty that late at night. The radio stayed off. I preferred listening to the quiet. Everett used to say that the truth often became clearer once the noise faded. By the time I pulled into my driveway, midnight had come and gone. The porch light cast a warm circle across the front steps. For the first time that day, I was completely alone. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The house greeted me with the familiar stillness I'd known ever since Everett passed away. His favorite armchair still sat beside the fireplace. His fishing hat still hung on the hallway hook. Some people had suggested I redecorate after he died. I never could. This house wasn't trapped in the past. It simply held the people I loved. I changed into my robe, made a cup of chamomile tea, and sat at the kitchen table. The wedding program was still inside my handbag. So was the place card from table 21. I laid both items on the table. For several minutes, I simply stared at them. One represented where I had been placed. The other represented who had been acknowledged. Neither included me. Without thinking, I opened the drawer beside the refrigerator. Inside were dozens of old family photographs. I pulled out one album, then another. Birthday parties, Christmas mornings, summer vacations, Keaton's first bicycle, his 8th grade graduation, his high school baseball championship. I smiled through tears I hadn't realized were forming. There I was in nearly every picture, standing beside Everett, holding Keaton's birthday cake, helping him open Christmas presents, cheering from the bleachers, reading to him on the living room floor. I hadn't imagined those years. I hadn't exaggerated my place in his life. The photographs proved it. Then I noticed something else. In the newer albums, after Sabrina became part of the family, I appeared less and less. At first, I was simply standing farther from the center. Then I appeared only in larger group pictures. Eventually, there were entire holidays where I wasn't photographed at all. I closed the final album slowly. A chill ran through me. The wedding hadn't been the beginning. It had been the conclusion of something that had been happening for years. Someone hadn't erased me in a single day. Someone had been erasing me one photograph, one gathering, one memory at a time. and for the first time since Everett's passing, I stopped asking myself whether I was imagining it. Instead, I asked a different question. How many people already knew and simply chose to stay silent? The next morning, I woke before sunrise. Sleep had come in short, restless moments. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the photographer lowering her camera. I heard Sabrina's calm voice. This photo is for immediate family only. By 6 o'clock, I was already standing in my kitchen, watching the coffee drip into my favorite blue mug. The house was quiet, peaceful. Usually mornings helped me think clearly. That morning, they only left me with more questions. I carried my coffee into the living room and sat beside the window Everett loved. Outside, the neighborhood looked exactly the same as it always had. A man walked his dog. A school bus stopped at the corner. Life had moved on. Mine felt as though it had paused somewhere between that family photograph and the empty seat at table 21. I reached for my phone. There were several messages from friends who had attended the wedding. Beautiful ceremony. Keaton looked so happy. Wonderful seeing you yesterday. I smiled as I answered each one. No one mentioned the photographs. No one mentioned where I had been seated. Perhaps they hadn't noticed, or perhaps they had been too polite to ask. Just as I was about to put my phone away, another notification appeared. Marin, my granddaughter. Grandma, are you home today? I smiled. Marin had always been different. Even as a little girl, she noticed the things everyone else overlooked. I am, I replied. Can I stop by? Of course. Less than an hour later, I heard her car pull into the driveway. She came inside carrying 2 coffees and a small paper bag from the bakery near her apartment. I figured you wouldn't feel like cooking breakfast. You know me too well. She hugged me tightly, not the quick, distracted kind of hug people give while thinking about something else. A real hug, the kind that says, I'm here. We sat at the kitchen table with cinnamon rolls between us. For a while, we talked about ordinary things. Her law classes, her summer internship, the honeymoon plans Keaton had shared with everyone. Neither of us mentioned the wedding reception. Finally, she placed her coffee cup down. Grandma, yes? Can I ask you something? You never have to ask permission. She hesitated. Why weren't you in the family pictures? The question hung quietly between us. I looked down at my coffee. So you noticed. Of course I noticed. She sounded almost surprised that I would think otherwise. I waited for you to come over. I even told Mom. She stopped herself, then corrected it. I asked Aunt Sabrina where you were. My heart skipped. What did she say? Marin frowned. She told me you didn't want to be in the pictures. I couldn't help it. A small, sad smile crossed my face. No, sweetheart. I wanted to be there. I walked over. I was asked to step back. She stared at me in complete disbelief. No, I'm afraid so. For several seconds, she said nothing. Then she slowly shook her head. That doesn't make any sense. I know. Keaton would never agree to that. I don't believe he knew. Neither did she. I was with him almost the entire afternoon, she said. He kept asking where everybody was between photos. He thought the photographer was just organizing different groups. That confirmed what I had believed all along. My grandson hadn't excluded me. Someone had controlled what he saw. Marin reached into her purse. I almost forgot. She pulled out her phone. I took a few behind-the-scenes pictures yesterday. She opened her photo gallery and began scrolling. Pictures of the ceremony, the reception, guests laughing, children dancing. Then, she stopped. There. She handed me the phone. The photograph wasn't professionally composed. It was taken from several yards away, but it showed something important. I was standing on the stone pathway, smiling politely. Only a few feet away stood Sabrina. Her hand was slightly raised toward me. Just beyond them, Marlo stood holding her camera, waiting. The picture had captured the exact moment before I stepped away. Without realizing it, Marin had photographed the truth. I didn't even know I had this, she whispered. Neither of us spoke for a moment. Then she zoomed in. Another detail became visible. Sabrina wasn't looking at me. She was looking directly at Marlo. Her expression wasn't angry. It was instructive, like someone giving directions, exactly as the photographer had described. Marin lowered the phone. Grandma, I think this was planned. I think so too. She leaned back slowly. I've been noticing something for a while. I looked at her. What do you mean? Family group chats, holiday planning, birthday invitations. She took a slow breath. Sometimes your name isn't on the first guest list. My stomach tightened. What? I always assumed it was a mistake. Then someone would suddenly say, "Oh, we forgot Grandma." She looked ashamed. I never thought about who kept forgetting. A memory flashed through my mind. Christmas dinner, 2 years earlier. The 4th of July barbecue. Keaton's birthday. Each time, someone had eventually called and apologized for the oversight. At the time, I'd accepted every apology. Now those apologies sounded different. Not accidental. Convenient. Marin reached across the table and took my hand. "I'm sorry. You don't have anything to apologize for." I should have paid more attention. I squeezed her hand gently. Sometimes the people closest to a situation are the last to see it. She nodded. Then she looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen before. It wasn't pity. It was determination. "Grandma, if someone has been rewriting our family's story, we're going to find out when it started." For the first time since the wedding, I realized something important. I was no longer searching for the truth alone. The rest of that afternoon, after Marin left, I didn't open another photo album. I didn't search through old emails. I didn't call Garrett. For the first time in years, I stopped trying to explain other people's behavior. Instead, I took out a yellow legal pad from the kitchen drawer and wrote one question across the top of the page. When did I begin disappearing from my own family? It sounded like an impossible question, but every answer has a beginning. You simply have to stop looking for excuses and start looking for patterns. I drew a line down the middle of the page. On the left, I wrote "Before Sabrina." On the right, I wrote "After Sabrina." The difference became obvious much faster than I expected. Before Sabrina came into our lives, Sundays were almost sacred. Garrett and Keaton came over nearly every weekend. Sometimes we'd grill hamburgers in the backyard. Sometimes we'd simply watch football together while Everett pretended not to spoil Keaton with extra dessert. Birthdays were celebrated in my dining room. Thanksgiving was always at my house. Every Christmas morning, Garrett insisted on bringing Keaton over before visiting anyone else. Not because I demanded it, because that's how our family had always been. Then Sabrina arrived. At first, nothing seemed unusual. She was thoughtful, attentive. She remembered birthdays. She brought flowers whenever she visited. She often told me how lucky she felt to become part of such a loving family. Looking back, I realized she never tried to separate us all at once. She did it gradually, so gradually that no single moment seemed worth questioning. The first change came on Thanksgiving. "We're going to spend the afternoon with my parents this year," Garrett had said. "Of course," I'd answered. Families should share holidays. The following Christmas, they arrived 3 hours later than expected. Traffic, they explained. The year after that, Christmas became breakfast with Sabrina's family and dinner with me. Then dinner became dessert. Eventually, dessert became a quick visit before bedtime. Every explanation sounded reasonable by itself. Life gets busy. People compromise. Married couples divide holidays. I'd told myself all those things. What I hadn't noticed was that every compromise required only one person to give something up. Me. I turned the page on my legal pad. Another memory surfaced. Keaton's college graduation. I remembered standing outside the auditorium searching for my family. Garrett finally waved from across the parking lot. "We're taking pictures over here, Mom." By the time I reached them, everyone was climbing into their cars. Sabrina smiled apologetically. "Oh, we already finished the family pictures. The photographer had another appointment." I remembered laughing. "That's okay. We can always take one with my phone." She had looked at the sky. "The lighting's getting bad." At the time, I believed her. Now I wasn't so sure. One forgotten photograph. One rushed goodbye. One missed invitation. Individually, they meant nothing. Together, they told a story. Late that afternoon, my phone rang. The caller ID showed Corinne Hale. Corinne and I had been friends for more than 40 years. She knew me well enough to hear things I never said aloud. "I've been waiting for your call," she said after I answered. "I was wondering how long it would take." I laughed softly. "You always could read my mind." "No, I can read your silence." That was Corinne. She never rushed conversations. She simply waited until people were ready to tell the truth. "How was the wedding?" she asked. "It was beautiful." And I stared out the kitchen window. And I don't think I was supposed to notice what happened. There was a brief pause. "What happened, Connie?" I told her everything. The family photograph, table 21, the slideshow, Marlo, Callum, Marin's photograph. When I finally finished, Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Then Corinne sighed. I've been debating whether to tell you something. My heart tightened. What is it? About 6 months ago, I ran into Sabrina at the grocery store. I listened carefully. We talked for a few minutes. She mentioned Keaton's wedding. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. She said she wanted the wedding to reflect the beginning of a new family legacy. I frowned. What does that mean? I asked her the same question. Corinne's voice became quieter. She laughed and said, Corinne stopped. What did she say? Some people belong in the past. Beautiful weddings should look toward the future. The words settled over me like cold rain. Some people belong in the past. At first glance, it sounded harmless, almost philosophical. Now I understood exactly what she had meant. She hadn't been talking about old traditions. She had been talking about me, Corinne continued. I remember thinking it was an odd thing to say. I assumed she meant outdated customs. So did I. But now it sounds different. Yes, it does. I thanked Corinne for telling me. Before hanging up, she said something Everett used to tell us both whenever life became complicated. The truth leaves footprints, Connie. It never disappears completely. After we ended the call, I walked upstairs to the small study Everett had once used as his home office. Most of the room hadn't changed since he passed away. His books still lined the shelves. His old oak desk faced the window. Inside the bottom drawer sat several neatly labeled file boxes. Everett believed every important document should have its place. Marriage certificates, insurance papers, property records, old tax returns. I wasn't looking for money. I wasn't looking for legal papers. I was looking for something much simpler, proof that my memories were real. Inside one box, I found dozens of envelopes filled with printed photographs Everett had developed years before everything became digital. Every envelope had a handwritten label. Christmas 2012. Keaton's graduation. 4th of July. Family reunion. I opened the first envelope, then the second, then the third. In almost every photograph Everett had taken, I was standing beside Keaton, laughing, talking, holding his arm, exactly where a grandmother should have been. I suddenly realized something that sent a chill through me. The wedding slideshow hadn't simply left me out. Someone had deliberately ignored an entire collection of family photographs. There was no shortage of pictures. There had only been a shortage of willingness to include them. I carefully returned every photograph to its envelope. My eyes drifted toward Everett's framed portrait sitting on the bookshelf. For years, I'd wondered whether I had become too sensitive, too lonely, too emotional after losing him. Not anymore. I wasn't imagining the pattern. I was finally seeing it. And once you truly see the truth, you can never convince yourself it was an accident again. 2 days after the wedding, my phone rang just as I was watering the roses Everett had planted years ago. The screen showed Garrett's name. For a moment, I simply looked at it. Part of me wanted to let it ring. Another part of me wondered whether he had finally realized something was wrong. I answered, "Good morning." "Morning, Mom." His voice sounded tired. Not guilty, just tired. We got back from helping Keaton and Tessa settle into the airport hotel. I'm sure they're excited. They are. A brief silence followed. "I wanted to check on you. I'm doing fine. I'm glad." Another silence. We had never struggled to talk before. When Garrett was younger, he used to tell me everything. His first broken heart, his first promotion, the day he decided to propose. Now every conversation felt as though we were carefully walking around something neither of us wanted to touch. Finally, he cleared his throat. "Sabrina thought you seemed a little quiet at the reception." I looked out the kitchen window. The irony almost made me smile. Sabrina noticed that? She was worried. I closed my eyes for a second. "No, Garrett. She wasn't." He didn't answer. Instead, he changed the subject. "Anyway, I just wanted to make sure you got home safely." "I did. I'm glad." We said goodbye a few moments later. The entire conversation lasted less than 4 minutes. Not once did he mention the family photograph. Not once did he ask why I had been sitting at the back of the ballroom. Not once did he say, "Mom, what happened?" When the call ended, I realized something painful. Garrett couldn't ask about something he had already decided not to see. That afternoon, I drove to Corinne's house. She lived only 20 minutes away, in a quiet neighborhood filled with old maple trees and front porches that still had rocking chairs. She welcomed me inside with a hug and a fresh pot of tea. "You look better today," she said. "I feel clearer." Those aren't always the same thing. She smiled knowingly. We sat in her sunroom overlooking a small vegetable garden. For years, this had been the place where we solved every problem life placed in front of us. Marriage, children, widowhood. Now we were trying to understand something neither of us had expected. Family betrayal that didn't arrive through shouting. It arrived through omission. Corinne listened quietly as I described Garrett's phone call. When I finished, she stirred her tea slowly. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course. Has Garrett ever defended you when Sabrina was present?" I thought about it. Christmas, birthdays, family dinners, vacation planning. The answer surprised me. "I don't think he has." "What about when she's not around?" "All the time." Corinne nodded gently. "Then your problem may not be hatred. It may be surrender." The word lingered in my mind. Surrender. Garrett hadn't become cruel. He had simply stopped resisting. Sometimes silence can hurt as deeply as harsh words. Later that afternoon, just as I was preparing to leave, Corinne handed me a small envelope. I almost forgot. "What's this?" I found it while organizing some old papers. Inside was a photograph. Not one I had ever seen before. It had been taken nearly 7 years earlier during Keaton's college graduation. Everyone stood together outside the university. Everett, Garrett, Keaton, me, even Sabrina. On the back, written in Everett's careful handwriting, were 4 simple words. Our whole family together. I stared at those words for a long time. Whole family. Everett had never divided people into categories. Immediate, extended, important, less important. If you belonged in his heart, you belonged in the picture. That evening, after returning home, I placed the photograph beside the wedding program on my kitchen table. The contrast was impossible to ignore. One picture showed the family we had built. The other represented the family someone wanted the world to see. As I sat there, my phone vibrated again. This time it was Marin. "Grandma, I think you should see this." A moment later, another message appeared. It contained a screenshot from social media. Someone had already posted the official wedding photographs. I opened the album. The first image showed Keaton and Tessa smiling beneath the vineyard arbor. The second showed both families together. The third showed the groom's family. I looked carefully. Garrett, Sabrina, Keaton, Tessa, several cousins, even distant relatives. I wasn't in a single frame. I continued scrolling. 20 photographs, 30, 40. Not one included me. It was as though I had never attended the wedding at all. Then I noticed something even stranger. One photograph showed guests gathered during cocktail hour. Near the edge of the original image, I could see the sleeve of my lavender dress. Except, someone had cropped the picture. Just enough to remove me. Not enough to change the composition. Just enough to erase my presence. Another photograph showed the dance floor. Again, I recognized the spot where I had been standing only moments before it was taken. The published version had been trimmed. Perfectly. Precisely. Deliberately. I enlarged the image. Then another. Then another. Each crop accomplished the same thing. Whenever I appeared near the edge of a frame, the edge disappeared. A cold realization settled over me. This wasn't about one awkward moment during the family portraits. This wasn't even about the wedding anymore. Someone had gone through dozens of professional photographs after the celebration and carefully edited me out. Not because I had ruined the pictures, not because I had caused a scene, simply because someone wanted the story of that day to exist without me. I sat back in my chair and looked once more at Everett's old photograph lying beside the wedding album on my phone. One picture said, "Our whole family together." The other silently claimed, "I had never been part of it." At that moment, I made a decision. I was done wondering whether Sabrina had erased me. The only question left was this. How long had everyone else been looking at the edited version of our family without realizing what had been cut away? A week passed. The wedding slowly faded from everyone's social media feeds. Friends posted vacation photos. Neighbors shared pictures of their gardens. Life moved forward the way it always does. But every now and then, someone would stop me at the grocery store or wave as I walked through town. Keaton's wedding looked beautiful. It certainly was. I loved the family photos. I always smiled. They turned out very nicely. I never explained. Not because I was protecting Sabrina. Because I was protecting my own peace. There comes a point in life when proving someone wrong costs more than simply walking away. I had reached that point. One quiet Thursday afternoon, there was a knock at my front door. When I opened it, Keaton was standing on the porch. Alone. He wasn't wearing the confident smile he'd worn on his wedding day. He looked tired, confused. "Grandma, I was hoping you were home." I stepped aside. "You never have to ask." He came inside and stood in the living room, looking around at the familiar house where he had spent so much of his childhood. His eyes rested on Everett's old fishing hat hanging by the hallway. "I haven't been here in too long." "No," I answered gently. "You haven't." Neither of us blamed the other. There wasn't any need. After a few moments, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone. "I've been looking through the wedding gallery." I nodded. "So have I." He swallowed. "I couldn't find a single picture of you." I didn't answer. I thought maybe the photographer hadn't uploaded them yet. He shook his head slowly. "So I called Marlo. That caught my attention." "What did she say?" "She asked me if I knew about the revised photo list." For the first time since the wedding, I saw genuine shock in my grandson's eyes. "I didn't know there was a revised list. I didn't know anyone had told you to step away." His voice broke. "Grandma, I'm so sorry." I reached across the table and placed my hand over his. "You have nothing to apologize for. I should have noticed. You were getting married. You were living one of the biggest moments of your life." He looked down. "I still should have noticed." We sat quietly for a while. Then I stood and walked to the bookshelf. From the top shelf, I picked up the old photograph Corinne had given me, the one Everett had labeled years ago. Our whole family together. I handed it to Keaton. He smiled through tears. "I remember this day. Grandpa kept making everyone laugh." He did. Keaton looked at the photograph for a long time. Then he noticed the writing on the back. "Our whole family together." He traced Everett's handwriting with his thumb. He never left anyone out. No, he never did. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Words weren't necessary. Some truths become too large for conversation. Finally, Keaton looked at me. "I want to make this right." I smiled softly. "You can't change your wedding day." "I know. But you can decide what happens after it." He nodded. That afternoon, before he left, he asked me one simple question. "Grandma, would you take a picture with me?" I laughed quietly. "I'd like that very much." We didn't hire a professional photographer. We didn't drive back to the vineyard. We simply walked into my backyard. The same backyard where Everett had taught Keaton to throw a baseball. The same backyard where birthdays had been celebrated and Christmas lights had been untangled every December. Marin happened to stop by a few minutes later. When she saw us, she smiled. "I'll take it." She held up her phone. "Move a little closer." Keaton slipped his arm around my shoulders. I held Everett's old photograph in one hand. The afternoon sun settled softly across the garden. "Ready?" Marin asked. We both smiled. Click. One photograph. No expensive camera. No seating chart. No guest list. No one deciding who belonged. Just a grandmother and her grandson. Exactly as it should have been. A few days later, Keaton sent me a framed copy. On the back, he'd written only one sentence. "No one will ever erase you from my family again." I placed that frame beside Everett's photograph on the bookshelf. The old picture and the new one stood side by side. One represented the family we had built. The other represented the family still worth protecting. As for Sabrina, I never argued with her. I never demanded an apology. I never tried to convince anyone of what she had done. The people who truly wanted the truth had already found it. The rest were free to believe whatever version of the story made them comfortable. Because I finally understood something Everett had tried to teach me throughout our marriage. A photograph can be cropped. A speech can leave out a name. A seating chart can move someone to the back of the room. But love doesn't disappear because someone edits the frame. The people who matter will always remember who stood beside them long before anyone picked up a camera. And that, I realized, was the only family picture that truly mattered. If you've stayed with me until the end, thank you for listening to my story. And if you've ever felt invisible in a room full of people who were supposed to love you, I hope you remember this. Never measure your worth by the space someone gives you in a photograph. Measure it by the place you've earned in the hearts of the people who truly know your love. Looking back now, I realize that being left out of a photograph was never the deepest wound. The real lesson was learning that my worth was never determined by where someone asked me to stand, but by the love I had quietly given over a lifetime. Some people may rewrite the story to make themselves look better, but they can never erase the truth from the hearts of those who lived it. And if life has taught me anything, it's this. Never chase a place in someone else's picture. Cherish the people who would never dream of taking you out of the frame.